Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission, as always, is to take a towering stack of sources, the research, the accounts, all the complex data, and really distill it into something you can understand, something that's thorough but also immediately applicable.
We don't just tell you what happened, we try to explain why it matters.
And today, we are undertaking a journey into the heart of one of history's most infamous failures of justice, the Salem witch trials of 1692.
But we're looking at this through an extraordinary lens. Our sources today detail the experiences of a very unique group of outsiders.
Outsiders?
Individuals with modern scientific and historical knowledge who somehow found themselves completely immersed in the Massachusetts Bay Colony at the precise moment this whole crisis began.
Wow. Okay, so that framework gives us more than just a straight historical account. It turns the whole narrative into a terrifying sociological study.
It does. What happens when you have this overwhelming religious fervor, this deep-seated fear and information overload, which back then was just gossip and rumor? And it all culminates in this devastating mass hysteria. These sources, they let us perform an almost forensic autopsy on the mechanics of panic itself.
So the core question we want to explore, and one we're posing directly to you, the listener, is this. When logic and modern knowledge collide with a belief system where fear, the occult, when they aren't abstract concepts but tangible physical facts, which one wins?
Can superior knowledge really resist that kind of tidal wave of collective emotion? We're going to analyze some shocking examples from these sources of how belief, especially in a place like Puritan, Massachusetts, fundamentally constructs reality. Let's unpack this.
Okay, part one. Our sources pinpoint the start of the crisis not with some big public accusation, but with a very specific, quiet activity.
A clandestine activity that the characters themselves immediately identify as the doorway to the devil.
It's an almost domestic scene, isn't it? But it's just saturated with tension.
It is. We start on January 14th, 1692, inside the cold, dark parsonage of Reverend Paris. And the activity is egg white divination.
A kind of fortune-telling ritual, right?
Exactly. It's a primitive ritual where girls drop raw egg white into water to see what shapes form. They're trying to interpret, what their future husband's professions will be.
A practice that, it was common enough in England, but in rigid Puritan Salem.
In Salem, it was dangerously close to a cult practice. It was forbidden.
So who's in the room? The group consists of the minister's daughter, Betty Paris, her cousin, Abigail Williams, Ann Putnam, Mary Warren, and this crucial observer, Susan.
And Susan is our outsider.
Right. The sources say she's immediately uncomfortable, feeling like a fraud. Tell me about that dynamic.
That tension is absolutely key. Susan is from a world where this is all just quaint superstition, but she's watching genuine, terrifying belief unfold right in front of her.
And Abigail Williams, she's only 11, but she's the dominant force here.
Oh, absolutely. The sources describe her speaking in an exaggerated whisper, treating this whole act with the gravity of a dark portent. Mary Warren, who's a bit older, is the cautious one. She's worried Paris, or the enslaved woman, Tituba, will notice they've taken an egg.
But Abigail just shuts that down immediately.
She does. And in doing so, you see the pattern that will define the rest of the trials. She assures Mary that Tituba will take the blame.
Even if it means she gets a beating.
Yes. This total disregard for the most vulnerable person there, it just underscores the cruelty and the power dynamics that were already at play right there in that little room.
And the girls, they rationalize this. They convince themselves that the omens are uncommonly good at this time. Why? What makes them think that?
This is where you see local gossip just feeding the fear. Only 2 days earlier, a man named young Goodman Brown from Salem town had reported seeing a demon in the forest.
And the description was very specific.
Vivid. Dark of eyes it was and red of skin, cloaked in unearthly fabrics, with terrible horns and hooves. For these girls, that wasn't a rumor. That was confirmation. The devil was active, he was present, and he was close.
So their belief system had been, in a way, validated right before they chose to do this forbidden thing.
Exactly. So the ritual goes ahead under this incredible spiritual tension. The goal is to divine their futures, but it focuses on Susan first.
The outsider.
And Putnam sees a quill in the water, suggesting, a learned man for a husband. But Abigail, who always needs to be in control, immediately contradicts her. She insists the shape is a sword, a fighting man.
And Susan is already uneasy. She says something that would have been, well, just scandalous in 1692 Salem,
She says she might not marry at all.
which in that time was almost like rejecting her place in society, rejecting God's plan for women.
Precisely. And Mary Warren immediately snaps back with the social consequence of that choice. She says Susan would become a bitter old spinster or a malicious beggar like Sarah Good.
Wow. And that's important, isn't it? They're already primed with the names and the stereotypes of who society rejects.
The names that will soon become targets, yes.
So this escalating pressure, it all leads to the climax of the ritual. Abigail decides to try and divine her own future.
And this is the ultimate mistake. This is the moment the air in the room shifts from nervous excitement to genuine abject terror.
Even Susan, the modern observer, feels it. The sources say she felt a sudden, powerful sense that this was wrong in the worst possible way.
As the egg white settles, the shape is unmistakable. Anne is the one who sees it first and just sputters out the word.
A coffin.
A coffin. Not a man, not a profession, a direct prophecy of death.
And Abigail's reaction is instantaneous, violent.
Her confidence just shatters. She screams in what sounds like both pain and rage, and she sweeps the glass off the table, smashing it against the wall.
And the sources note that even the damp pattern left on the wood,
It still looked like a coffin.
and that's what triggers the first fit.
Yes. Abigail immediately collapses into this convulsive state, thrashing, crying, her eyes rolling back, her whole body seized by spasms. It's so genuinely terrifying that Betty and Anne just follow suit, screaming and wailing.
And Susan, the observer, she's completely overwhelmed. Her scientific detachment just, it fails. She feels the sheer power of that collective fear.
And Mary Warren, completely convinced by what she's seeing, gives the diagnosis that will define everything that follows. She says, "The devil has come amongst us. We should never have done his work."
We should never have used the devil's tools.
And that's the moment the narrative identifies as the critical turning point. The point where, as it says, the first link strained and began to fracture. The girl's shared guilt, combined with that horrifying physical fit, it instantly validated a supernatural cause for everyone in that room.
They went from simple disobedience to a perceived, legitimate interaction with the demonic.
And that shared delusion is the bedrock upon which the rest of this entire tragedy is built.
The fallout from that ritual, it immediately puts the outsiders in peril. Susan retreats. She's confused, ashamed.
And she realizes her attempts to signal her, different upbringing and culture, her modern worldview, were a severe, possibly life-threatening mistake in this society.
Meanwhile, the doctor, another one of the outsiders, is consumed by this fear of historical contamination. He bursts in to find his companion, Barbara, and delivers a stark warning.
He's desperately trying to pin down the exact date. He's terrified they've arrived too early or too late. He warns her that a great tragedy will befall Salem Village soon, and that their actions could make them the catalyst to spark off the witch hunt a year early.
And this leads to a critical error, a mistake that almost guarantees they'll interfere.
It does. Barbara, looking at some documentation they have, she assures the doctor. The date is January 15th, 1691. She's relieved. She thinks they have a full year to observe and then leave.
Whole year.
A whole year. And the doctor, who usually trusts her meticulousness, he accepts this, though the source says reluctantly. But that false sense of security, that one-year buffer, it gives them the confidence to interfere.
Which is exactly what Susan does next.
Still railing, she goes straight to the Proctor farmhouse to try and talk some sense into Mary Warren. She insists that the fits, all these unusual events, they can have a scientific explanation.
Which is a perfectly rational, modern argument.
But in Salem, it's heresy. Mary Warren instantly rejects it. For her, if Susan can't accept the devil's power, it must mean she comes from a godless town indeed.
Susan is trying to introduce a logical framework that just say away. It can't coexist with Puritan cosmology. For them, every misfortune is either divine judgment or demonic interference.
And Susan pushes it even further. She argues that the local authorities are just using silly legends and religion to keep others in their place.
So now she's not just challenging the devil, she's challenging the entire power structure of the colony.
And that challenge is immediately overheard by the master of the house, John Proctor.
Who's enraged.
Completely enraged. The sources describe him recognizing not just disobedience in this wicked child, but heresy. He sees her modern skepticism as a literal contamination. The devil must be beaten out of her.
He tries to use a whip.
He does. And Susan, fighting for survival, acts on pure instinct. She bats a cauldron of boiling soup from the hearth, It burns her hand, but it forces Proctor to dodge, giving her just enough time to tear her cloak and run, sobbing, out of the house and into the fields.
This frantic escape, combined with everything else, immediately confirms the worst suspicions of Reverend Samuel Parris.
Parris, who sees his family and his flock as being under spiritual siege, pursues them into the forest, which he calls the heathen domain.
He's convinced God has tasked him to uncover this affront to heaven.
And the forest, which has always been the domain of the wildly unconverted, it gives him the confirmation he's looking for. He hears the laughter of girls, light and shrill, which he interprets as a gathering. Then he hears a deep voice reciting macabre incantations.
He sees a flickering light and assumes it's unholy fire.
Yes, it cements his fear that unholy sorcery was being practiced here. Parris isn't looking for evidence. He's looking for validation for his anxiety.
And this sets the stage for Abigail Williams to perform her first major act of, well, political manipulation. This is on January 16th. Parris confronts her.
And Abigail, she seizes the opportunity to deflect blame for the divination, for the fits. She lies strategically. She claims Susan tempted us into evil ways, and even says Susan's suggested marriage was blasphemous.
And then she redirects the suspicion up the chain.
Exactly. She claims Susan's father, Goodman Chesterton, who was actually Ian, must be a threat. By claiming Ian is preaching heresies and controlling Susan, she shifts the focus completely off her own actions and onto this well-defined external threat, the newcomers.
She's learned the game of accusation instantly.
And then the final devastating piece of the puzzle falls into place. The doctor meets Rebecca Nurse, and she informs him that the date is, in fact, 1692.
Oh.
She adds the crucial historical footnote that some people still count it as 91 because the New Year date had only recently changed.
So the doctor's false sense of security, that year-long buffer.
It vanishes. He realizes they've arrived right at the ignition point of the crisis.
Yeah.
The sources describe him feeling mounting but controlled panic. They aren't observers with a year to spare.
They're immersed. And their attempts to interfere have already given Parris the external target he needed to launch his investigations, the Chesterton family.
That terrifying realization that they are participants at the start of an inferno brings us to the summer of 1692, when the trials are in full swing. We should probably bridge that gap. What happened between January and June to make the fear go viral?
Right, because it starts in one house and then just explodes.
It's a classic pattern of escalation. The initial fits were in the parsonage, but once Parris brought in outside authorities, other ministers, magistrates, who confirmed demonic activity, the belief spread like a contagion.
And the afflicted girls gained enormous social power.
Immense power. They identified vulnerable targets. Tituba, Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne. The arrests solidified the community's conviction that the devil was physically present and attacking Salem. This collective confirmation loop is what moved the crisis from a local incident to a judicial massacre.
So now we have this fascinating analysis from the doctor, looking at the whole thing through a scientific lens. What was his core diagnosis of what the afflicted were experiencing?
The doctor's diagnosis is clear, and he offers it in the strictest medical sense. This is a classic severe outbreak of hysteria.
But he immediately links the clinical symptoms to the sociological environment.
Yes, he says this hysteria stems directly from the repressed emotions inherent in that devoutly puritanical colony.
Puritan life was all about control and repression. There were almost no emotional outlets, especially for women and girls.
None. For men, there were sanctioned activities, work, prayer, maybe hunting. But for girls, every emotion, every thought was judged against this punishing standard of piety. The doctor theorizes that when that psychological pressure has no safe release, it finds an outlet through the body.
So the fits, the writhing, the contortions, the screaming become a kind of physical language.
A desperate attempt to communicate psychological suffering, yes.
And the critical failure of 1692 is that they just didn't have the knowledge to call it hysteria.
They didn't. In their world, if something can't be explained by their limited science or common illness, it must be supernatural. A visible thrashing body is definitive. Physical proof of witchcraft.
Because their whole culture is based on a tangible, active God and a similarly tangible devil.
So the fits are interpreted as a physical attack from the spirit world. And the source notes that from the perspective of the 17th century witness, the fits are very convincing indeed.
Which brings us to a fascinating concept. The doctor confirms that magic works here in every important sense. That's a huge statement for a scientist. How does he square that?
He's forced to define magic through a psychosomatic mechanism. He argues that in a culture where collective belief is so absolute, a curse can manifest genuine physical effects because the victim expects it to happen.
The expectation becomes neurological.
Precisely. The mind literally convinces the body to produce symptoms that are physically real. The doctor uses the example of Ann Putnam falling ill after Bridget Bishop allegedly threatened her. Anne blamed the curse. The doctor notes that the brain can even simulate illness or bruising if it expects to suffer them.
So if your entire worldview tells you that a specific action from a specific person will make you sick, your body is conditioned to react.
The collective belief system essentially validates the curse and makes it effective on a physiological level.
But if the cause is hysteria, does that mean everyone accused was innocent? The sources seem to have a surprising amount of nuance on this point.
They do. The outsider sources are clear that conventional history has it that none of the Salem witches were guilty of that crime. But they clarify that this is because modern historians can't conceive of the black arts existing.
So the sources argue that some people were genuinely practicing.
Yes, motivated by much more earthly reasons. Power and notoriety. The doctor lists them. Power. The thrill of doing such an immense wrong in such a repressive society. In Salem, just the suspicion of being a witch granted you a twisted kind of social standing.
People were too terrified to deny you a kindness or a favor.
Fearing their crops would fail or their cow would get sick. These individuals used the prevailing fear as a tool to gain control and leverage in a brutally controlling society. They consciously embraced the identity.
And we see this firsthand through the observers' encounters. Let's look at Susan's meeting with Bridget Bishop.
Bridget Bishop is one of those famous figures, the first person hanged. Susan meets her and notes how different she is. Bishop is dressed in striking red, not the usual Puritan gray.
And Bishop, in this moment of just alarming candor, says what?
She just states, "I am the local witch, dear."
She owns it.
She owns it. She understands the power that fear gives her. And Susan is unnerved not just by the confession, but by what she sees in Bishop's possession, a simple rag doll.
The kind of object later used as evidence in court.
Exactly. Skewered by 3 pins. Bishop was clearly playing the part. She's using folk tradition to maintain a social edge.
And you can contrast that with what Ian and Barbara encounter in the forest.
That's a different level of commitment. They stumble upon a coven led by a woman named Candy. These women are dirty, unkempt, and they're actively, ritually dancing around a fire, reciting incantations.
When they're discovered.
They verbally curse him. Candy warns, "A curse upon the both of you should you tell of this."
So even Ian, the modern skeptic, is left incredulous. These women are fully committed to the witch identity.
It confirms the idea that the witch hunt provides an outlet for the marginalized. For women already outside the rigid social structure, embracing the identity gave them a perverse sense of community and authority. Some of them weren't just scapegoats, they were active participants in a kind of counterculture.
This intense environment, it starts to infect the observers themselves. Susan develops physical symptoms, headaches, nightmares.
And the doctor attributes this to her developing telepathic powers. He explains her illness as a kind of psychic feedback loop.
So her abilities are being bombarded by the strong, forceful emotions and images of the hysteria.
She's not immune to the collective unconscious of 1692. She is, as the source says, sharing in the delusions and even feeding them.
And we get concrete proof of this when Susan and Mary Warren realize they share a specific, terrifying memory.
Yes, they both recall being taken to a witches' congregation behind the parsonage, forced to drink the devil's blood, this foul, thick, red concoction, and being pinched and bitten.
So the fantastic, which Susan knows rationally can't be real,
is made terrifyingly real because she shares the trauma with Mary. Her mind is actively participating in the mass delusion.
This descent into collective madness brings us to the most detailed and, frankly, poignant account in the sources. The trial of Rebecca Nurse on June 29th.
This case just crystallizes the failure of the whole system. Rebecca Nurse is the antithesis of the typical accused. She's frail, elderly, devout, deeply respected.
The last person you'd suspect of devil worship.
And her trial takes place before the Court of Oyer and Terminer, presided over by Chief Justice William Stoughton, a man described as rigid and imposing with his profoundly condemning glare. The meeting house isn't a place of worship. It's a teeming, vindictive throng.
So what evidence was actually brought against such a devout woman?
Much of it was decades old, fueled by land disputes and social animosity, especially with the powerful Putnam family. One woman, Goodwife Holden, claimed Rebecca caused her husband's death after a quarrel. Personal grudges were systematically being reinterpreted as witchcraft.
But her husband, Francis Nurse, he tries to fight back.
He does. He presents a petition signed by nearly 40 respected members of the community, all attesting to her good character.
But that's immediately overshadowed by the testimony of a confessed witch.
Yes. Deliverance Hobbs, a fellow prisoner who confessed under duress, is brought in. And Rebecca, just astonished by this betrayal, protests, "You bring one of us into the court."
And what does Hobbs testify?
Hobbs, described as sallow and bedraggled, says that Rebecca was at witches' meetings in Paris's pasture, acting as a deacon, handing out red bread and blood wine.
Which instantly transforms her from a respected elder into a leader of a demonic coven.
And then comes the spectral torture, the ultimate weapon of the afflicted girls.
Abigail Williams and Ann Putnam Jr. fall into these vicious fits, screaming that Rebecca's spirit is physically hurting them.
The dramatic peak is Ann Putnam Sr.'s testimony. She claims the spirits of her 6 dead children appeared in her dreams, crying out the name of the one who condemned them with her spells.
And that name was Rebecca Nurse's.
The afflicted girls immediately amplify this. Mary Warren's legs cross so tightly that it seemed they must break.
It's just absolute chaos, and yet, despite all of that, the jury does the unthinkable.
They do. They return a verdict of not guilty.
Not guilty.
Rebecca Nurse, weeping in relief, is the first suspect acquitted by this court. For a moment, it seems like sanity has prevailed.
But that sanity is immediately and brutally suppressed. What happens? Is Stoughton's intervention genuinely about belief in the fits, or is it political, fueled by pressure from the Putnams?
The sources suggest it's a combination, but with strong political overtones. Stoughton's career depended on establishing the court's divine authority. The fits were the pretext, but it was Thomas Putnam's screamed outburst, accusing the jury of being perverse, of freeing Rebecca to spread her malice across the world, that provided the social pressure.
And Stoughton intervenes. He forces the jury to reconsider, and he zeroes in on that single ambiguous statement Rebecca made to Hobbs.
"You bring one of us into the court."
Stoughton interprets us to mean fellow witch.
He forces the jury to reevaluate it as a confession. Rebecca, who was hard of hearing and deeply distraught, later clarifies she meant fellow prisoner and didn't even hear the question in all the pandemonium. But that doesn't matter to the court. Stoughton's message is clear. The court would not tolerate an acquittal that undermined their authority.
And the jury, obedient and terrified, retires again.
They return with the inevitable verdict, guilty. Rebecca is dragged away, and the final thing she hears, bellowed by Stoughton, is, "Remove the witch from my court!" Her death sentence is sealed, based on a misunderstanding and theatrical terror.
The conviction of Rebecca Nurse isn't just a tragedy. The sources show it's the moment the outsiders completely abandon any pretense of just observing.
Yes, Ian the scientist immediately joins Francis Nurse's desperate campaign for an appeal.
His motivation is purely rational, isn't it? He's fighting a procedural injustice.
Exactly. He insists on finding Thomas Fisk, the jury foreman, to get a formal statement, confirming the verdict was overturned, only because of that misunderstanding, not because of any new evidence. Ian's keen mind and tongue give the appeal the legal precision it needs to challenge the court's authority before the governor in Boston.
But while that rational fight is being waged, the psychological warfare just continues to break down the community. Mary Warren is seized by this devastating delusion.
She's kidnapped in her nightmare by a hooded coven. She's forced to drink the devil's blood again, and she's painfully bitten by a familiar.
And the sources are clear. The familiar who attacks her has Susan's face.
The mass delusion is literally incorporating the new threat, the outsiders, into his demonic pantheon.
And in the wake of that trauma, Mary turns against her friend.
She tells Abigail Williams that Susan was her chief tormentor in the forest, claiming, "The devil wears your shape." Mary genuinely believes Susan must be punished as a witch to save the colony. The hysteria turns friends into persecutors.
Meanwhile, Barbara faces that same mob mentality spreading in Ingersoll's tavern.
She accidentally bumps into Ann Putnam, who just shrieks, instantly accusing Barbara of being in league with the witch bishop. Thomas Putnam joins in, and the crowd begins to close in.
Barbara describes sensing the spirit of the witch hunt, physically coagulating from the fear and spite.
It illustrates how easily an accusation could ignite a mob. It almost leads to tragedy.
But the doctor intervenes.
Just in time, he uses his authoritative presence, towers over them, and unleashes this powerful, stern command. His certainty just fractures the emotional hold of the crowd, and he scatters them with the advice, "It is far better to let the guilty go unpunished than to make the innocent suffer."
This high-profile interference, it immediately brings the authorities down on them. Paris, Stoughton, and the influential Boston clergyman Cotton Mather start discussing arresting the
And
Chestertons.
Abigail is there listening, ready to capitalize. She claims Susan's father, Ian, is a warlock who controls Susan. And Paris is eager to arrest Ian, not just for heresy, but to hinder their attempts to undermine the court's authority, a direct reference to the nurse appeal.
So their legal fight has now become a life-or-death threat to themselves.
Yes, recognizing the danger, Ian insists on going to Boston with Francis Nurse. But the doctor makes this momentous decision, a profound departure from his rules of non-interference,
He agrees to go in Ian's place.
to ensure Ian stays with Susan, who might have need of your strength. And this action sets up the doctor's internal moral conflict. He explicitly promises Francis that he will do whatever it takes to ensure that Rebecca Nurse receives her pardon.
He's choosing compassion over historical duty.
And the day after making that promise, July 2nd, he makes a clandestine visit to the Salem dungeon. This moment, it just crystallizes his ethical dilemma. What does he see there?
It's appalling, isn't it?
Physically appalling. The stench, the darkness, fetid water. He sees half-starved prisoners, a young girl chained tightly. The suffering is so acute, his scientific detachment just breaks. He sees a jailer brutally beating another female prisoner, and he rushes in, forgetting who and where he is, only to be thrown back, realizing he has no authority here.
And that helplessness, it fuels his determination about Rebecca.
He bribes the guard with 4 pennies, 2 days' wages, and uses a forged document to briefly release Rebecca for interrogation. He sees her, filthy and chained, but she radiates this desperate hope. She tells him she'd never lost faith that he would save her.
And the doctor, knowing her execution date is immutably set for the 19th of July, makes a promise he knows he can't keep.
He tells her, "I will see you free of this place. I give you my word on it." He then leaves, feeling this heavy weight settled upon his shoulders, realizing he's been impulsive and foolish.
It's the moment where the rules of time travel meet human empathy, and empathy wins.
And it creates this profound, acute conflict for him.
This raises a fundamental question about their rules. Why is Rebecca Nurse's death too important to the historical chain? If he saves her, what's the actual risk?
The sources confirm the existence of fixed points in history events too influential to be altered without catastrophic results. Rebecca Nurse's execution, specifically the widespread public revulsion that followed the hanging of such a respected, pious woman, was a vital catalyst.
Her death, and others like George Burroughs, fueled the immediate backlash that led Governor Phipps to finally halt the trials.
Exactly. So if the doctor saves Rebecca, he might save one life, but he risks removing the very event that led to the end of the witch hunt, potentially leading to the deaths of many more people.
Her death is a necessary evil that generates the revulsion needed for systemic change.
And he knows he would break a vital link by saving her, yet he's now bound by his word. It's his duty to history versus his overwhelming human desire to mitigate the suffering of one innocent woman.
While that's happening, Susan has made her own attempt to fix things and finds herself back late in 1692, overwhelmed by the realization that all their efforts have failed.
The doctor finds her alone on Gallows Hill, where Bridget Bishop had been hanged 19 days earlier. She's staring at the oak tree, recognizing it as the place they bring people to die, and she's despondent.
Realizing that to their world, all this will mean nothing. Their knowledge failed to alter the tragedy.
And the doctor tries to pull her back from that despair. He explains that the witch hunt wasn't an aberration, but the culmination of years of oppression and fear and hatred. It had to happen because the colony needed this psychological release.
And he reinforces that philosophical limit on what they can do.
We can't always be actors in the play, he tells her. Sometimes it is given to us merely to be the audience.
And this final acceptance, it leads us to the final brutal act of condemnation, one that's arguably worse than the verdict itself. July 3rd, they attend church to blend in before they try to flee.
And Reverend Parris uses his sermon to rail against those who would overturn a fair decision of God's own court, aiming it squarely at Francis Nurse and, by extension, the doctor and Ian.
He's linking political dissent with spiritual damnation.
He is. And then Rebecca Nurse is led down the aisle in chains. She's stripped of all her dignity. But what happens next is a devastating blow to her soul.
The minister delivers a sentence of excommunication.
This is the ultimate condemnation. It's not just death by hanging. It's being banished from God's church, condemned to hell, cut off from the salvation she had devoted her life to. The hangman might take her body, but Paris has successfully destroyed the last thing she clung to, her faith. her hope is utterly extinguished.
It's incredible how quickly logic just failed everyone. The jury, the court. It suggests the social pressure in that meeting house was just unbearable.
It suggests that survival was linked to conformity. For the jury, agreeing with Stoughton and the Putnams was safer than challenging the narrative. The fear of damnation, whether from the devil or the chief magistrate, it outweighed the love of justice. The system was designed to seek confession and validation, not evidence.
So this deep dive, seen through the eyes of these outsiders, it provides this harrowing look at the overwhelming power of collective, weaponized belief.
The Chesterton family, despite their keen minds and modern logic, were ultimately unable to fight a culture where fear and the devil were experienced as physical, tangible presences.
The real aha moment here is realizing that history doesn't just change because superior knowledge is presented. This crisis was too layered of psychological trauma, religious doctrine, politics, economics, to be disrupted by reason alone.
Their attempts to intervene only serve to prove that reason is often secondary to emotional state when a society is gripped by fear.
And the tragic theme is that historical change requires changing these deeply ingrained collective emotional states. And that takes time and often immense unavoidable suffering. It's all underscored by that poignant detail from the sources. The original meaning of Salem, from Shalom.
Peace. And while the historical chain can't be broken, the sources show us that the fight for the innocent still holds this immense personal value. We know the fate awaiting Rebecca Nurse on the 19th of July. But despite his duty to non-interference, despite the web of history, the doctor made an impulsive promise rooted in pure compassion. I will see you free of this place.
And the question to leave you with is this. What implications does that final conscious act of human morality have for his own life and his future ability to observe history impartially? That internal conflict, that personal struggle between duty and compassion, perhaps that's the deepest dive of all.